From concerns about dementia and Alzheimer's to enhanced memory and performance, brain health has rapidly moved to the forefront of our attention radars in recent years. But is there anything we can actually do to enhance our brain health? Or is the health of our brain simply a function of our given genes? Welcome to the Catalyst Health, Wellness, and Performance Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Bradford Cooper of the Catalyst Coaching Institute, and today's guest is Dr. John Randolph, psychologist, board-certified neuropsychologist, and author of the new book, The Brain Health Book, Using the Power of Neuroscience to Improve Your Life. If you're planning to pursue certification as a health and wellness coach, or adding that certification to your current professional toolbox as a nurse, physical therapist, physician, etc., our next MBHWC-approved training is just around the corner. The schedule and all the details are on the website, catalystcoachinginstitute.com. Or if you're thinking about how credible, personalized coaching could enhance your organization's employee wellness program or help reduce turnover, reach out to us. We can talk it through. Email is results@catalystcoachinginstitute.com. We'll set up a time to discuss either or both of these at your convenience. Now, it's time to be a catalyst with the guy who literally wrote the book on brain health, Dr. John Randolph, on the latest episode of the Catalyst Health, Wellness, and Performance Coaching Podcast. Wow, brain health. We have got the guy who literally wrote the book on the subject, Dr. John Randolph. Great to have you here, John.
Thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to it.
So this has ended up being an immense topic currently, but you've been working on this a long time. What originally took you down this path?
So, I can go as far back as college that I had an interest in psychology and neuroscience. I took a few classes on the brain-related aspects of behavior and kind of rode that wave into graduate school where I studied clinical psychology and neuropsychology, and then after that into my postdoctoral residency. But what's interesting about neuropsychology is that our focus has historically been on documenting cognitive problems, seeing people where there might be a question of dementia, such as Alzheimer's disease, or a brain injury, even learning disabilities, ADHD, trying to see if those are, challenges that we need to document to try to help folks out. But more recently, my field of neuropsychology has started to make more of a shift toward promoting brain health. It's kind of the other side of the equation. And this is dovetailed with this real explosion of research on brain health over the last 10 years or so, where we've developed a lot more understanding about the lifestyle activities we can engage in day to day that really help the brain work better. So I've been really passionate about this area. I've learned a lot myself. I've had the opportunity to write and edit a few books on the topic, and there's really so much there. So really looking forward to, sort of taking a deep dive here with you today.
So you mentioned lifestyle stuff. Our listeners love that because that's why they're here in the first place. You talk about really three keys to brain health: physical activity, social engagement, and intellectual activity. Let's just take each one of those at a time. We'll start with physical activity. And how do those influence brain health? And what do you mean by that? Because physical activity is very different for Joe versus Steve versus Sally versus Janet. I mean, it's just, we all have different visions of that. So if you could give us some context for what that means, and then how does that help?
Yeah, great question and an important question. We all think about how we need to exercise more. We've probably been told that or thought about that forever. But now we've got this great science that shows that if you exercise about 20 to 30 minutes a day, and that could be anywhere from a brisk walk for Sally or a hike for Tom or dancing for both Sally and Tom, it doesn't necessarily matter what form it takes as long as you're exerting yourself at a moderate level where you're able to have a conversation, but your heart rate is up a bit. We know that if you're in that zone, you are growing new neurons in the brain, and particularly in this memory critical area that's called the hippocampus, which is what we rely on to learn and remember new information. We know that exercise actually does a number of things for the brain besides grow new neurons, which in and of itself is very exciting. But exercise also helps balance the chemistry of the brain, our various neurotransmitters and what are called neurotrophic factors like brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Some people have called this the miracle grow of the brain. It sort of helps all of our other billions of neurons function more effectively. We also know that when we exercise more, we actually reduce the risk of developing dementia, such as Alzheimer's disease, very significantly. In people who exercise the most, we actually see a 50% lower risk, or even lower risk than that, in people that are very active. So I could kind of go on and on about this topic, but if there's, one thing that your listeners remember, it's that exercise is probably the single best thing you can do for brain health.
Wow. It's good news for all the folks that are like, yeah, I'm still got my resolutions going here. All right. So social engagement's the next one. And you also reference super agers within this category and how they're related to the social engagement. Walk us through that one. Why does that matter so much? We talk a lot about in health and wellness, the 4 cornerstones of move, fuel, rest, and connect. And you've nailed that connect piece here. Talk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, social connections are so critically important for our emotional health, for our quality of life. I mean, we're very social creatures, obviously, but it's also great for brain health. And this is a somewhat less intuitive connection for many people, and one that they might not have heard about. But we see in the science of brain health that people who are more frequently socially active and also have a larger network of people that they interact with at least once a month or so. It doesn't have to be somebody you see or talk to or have a Zoom call with every day, but at least about once a month. That broad group of people, if you have a larger network of those folks, you have better brain health in the moment, and you also have a much lower risk of developing cognitive problems down the road. We also see that people who feel a good amount of social support, where they feel kind of nourished by people in their network, they feel positive connections, those people also tend to have better brain health in the moment. We see conversely that when people feel very lonely or socially isolated, those experiences are actually very toxic for brain health. So we want to do, what we can to help people find those connections, because we know that isolation piece is really detrimental. Now, shifting to what you mentioned as far as this group of people called the super agers, really fascinating group of individuals. So these are people, it's kind of a whimsical term, super agers. I think of people wearing this cape with like an SA on it or something. These are people that are in their 80s or beyond and have brains that look like the brains of folks that are in their 50s, people that are 30 years younger. They also have memory skills that are about at the same level of folks that are that much younger too. So this, begs the question. So why are these people in this super agers group? What is it about their lifestyles, their genetics, this and that? Well, the jury is still out, but we do have some really interesting clues as to why some people age exceptionally well in terms of brain health. One of them really ties back into what we were just discussing, which is that these people tend to report being pretty extroverted. When we measure personality, one of the dimensions we look at is extroversion or introversion. And these people tend to be a bit more extroverted than others in their age range. They also, generally speaking, tend to have very positive relationships and describe having, good connections with other people when asked and when they fill out rating scales along these lines. And on the sort of biological level, there's kind of this interesting correlation between what I just mentioned and what's happening in their brains from what we're learning so far. There is a special type of brain cell that's called a von Economo neuron. And von Economo neurons are neurons that are only in social creatures. So that would obviously include us, but also includes humpback whales, some great apes, some dolphin species. So other animals that tend to value social connections. And the super agers, they have these von Economo neurons at a level above and beyond that of other people. They have more of them than the rest of us do. So, it's kind of a chicken or egg question. Is it, were they born this way? Did they develop these neurons throughout life? Hard to know, but just one other sort of intriguing piece of this whole puzzle.
Interesting. So a couple of side trails with this. So you mentioned social creatures. What about those folks who are listening to this going, dude, you don't know me. Like, my dream day is like reading a book and, looking at the sunrise and going on a hike by myself. And what about that person that says, Doc, that's just not me. Like, really? Should I do it anyway? And what would be your thought about that? Should I do it anyway?
Yeah, it's a great question and a great thing to bring up. When we think about folks who are more introverted, there's nothing wrong with that. That's a great thing.
Sure.
We need that sort of balance of different types of personalities in our society, in our network, to make things work well. So, being more reserved and introverted is certainly a good thing for many people. What I like to suggest is think about social activity as getting a dose of social activity. So if you're more extroverted, that's just going to come with the territory. You kind of seek that energy and interacting with other people. But for folks who are more reserved and introverted, just trying to find ways to connect for maybe 5 to 10 minutes at a time, a few times a day if possible, to kind of get that dose, just as we think of a dose of medication, a dose of social activity. So that way, you can sort of check that box, but still, be able to do your own thing and be comfortable with that. And I think that's a reasonable balance.
That's super helpful. And I think you even mentioned when you're talking earlier about it's almost like a monthly dose. We just want you trying to connect on a monthly basis with a group of folks. And that doesn't mean 5 minutes a month, folks. But, if you can reach out and make that connection or interact or whatever, it doesn't have to be 6 hours a day or anything. Okay, so Doc, in the physical realm, we have folks that seem to be aging more quickly. On the other end, we have people that are aging more slowly. So the 80-year-old that physically looks like a 50-year-old, we also have 50-year-olds that internally are aging like an 80-year-old, not because of some genetic problem, but out of lifestyle stuff. Are we seeing the same thing with the brain side of things? You mentioned super agers. Are there also maybe rapid agers where a 50-year-old's brain, because of social media or binging Netflix all day or lack of activity or social connection, whatever, that their brains look like they're 80 when they're actually 50?
Yeah, really important thing to bring up. We know that getting people to be more active is a difficult thing. It's easier said than done. Right now we're, sort of at the beginning of the year, people have their New Year's resolutions to exercise more. Most of those resolutions, unfortunately, will fade away pretty quickly because building in those new habits, especially related to exercise, much easier said than done. When we look at people who are more sedentary, they are definitely at more risk of developing cognitive problems down the road, including something like Alzheimer's disease. We know that it's not just physical activity. Even when we look at eating patterns, like people that eat along the lines of what we call the Western style diet, which includes a lot of saturated fat and red meat, a lot of processed and sugary foods and sweets. Those folks are also at a significantly increased risk of dementia compared to people who eat along the lines of something like a Mediterranean style diet with lots of fruits and vegetables and, let's say, fish or chicken for dense protein, beans and nuts, olive oil, whole grains. Those people have a much lower risk of developing problems down the road. So there are sort of multiple categories where people can either increase or decrease their risk of kind of healthy aging. And we're talking about, let's say, physical activity and diet, social activity, as we mentioned earlier. People who are more isolated socially also have an increased risk of developing cognitive problems compared to others. Being mentally sedentary, same thing. If you're not really being mentally stimulated by doing things like being in a stimulating job, which many of your listeners probably have, which is great, or reading or doing crossword puzzles, even woodworking or digital photography, other hobbies that are fun but mentally engaging. The more we do those things, the better off we tend to be as far as brain health, the less often the more risk we have for brain-related problems.
So that kind of touches on the third area that you talked about, the intellectual activity. Walk us through that. What you mentioned 4 or 5 examples there, other things that people can see, integrate, et cetera, into their lives in terms of this intellectual activity piece?
Yeah. So, one of the things we see with intellectual activity is that there's something about having a variety of activities. There's a researcher down at Johns Hopkins named Dr. Michelle Carlson who has done a lot of really interesting work in this area. And in particular, what she and her group found was that if we engage in one activity, like let's say we're really into reading, that's a good thing. That's healthy for the brain. But if we mix it up and add in other activities like playing card or board games, again, woodworking, digital photography, quilting. These have all actually been looked at in different studies. The additional activities we add in, every additional activity reduces our risk of memory problems by about 10%.
Wow.
So if you start adding those up, even if you're not doing these things all the time, these can actually be done infrequently. But if, every week or two you do a crossword puzzle and somewhere in between there you do a virtual museum tour, which, we can't go to museums quite as easily now. Some people might do that, but there are lots of virtual museum tours we can do. Or, let's say you take a community course on a topic of interest that really stretches you, that allows you to kind of be a beginner again, doing something that you're unfamiliar with. That's really great for the brain when we really stretch ourselves into unfamiliar areas. The more of those activities we engage in, obviously within reason, the more likely that we'll age better from a brain health standpoint.
All right. So as you're talking, one of my favorite parts of the day, Susanna, my wife, who's brilliant at dinner, we'll just throw topics out and she'll challenge me. It's not like a debate or anything, but she'll be like, really? Like, really, you think that? And I'll be like, yeah. And wait a minute, maybe I don't. Let me, and I'm wondering, it seems like, and I don't want us to go into a political realm here, but it seems like right now, no one's listening. If you're on Twitter, it's not to have a conversation. It's to me tell you why you're wrong. It's you to tell me why I'm wrong. In the political realm, there's no conversation. There's no interaction. It's just, you're wrong, I'm right, move forward. In the, even in quotes, scientific, no vaccine, yes vaccine. It's just, there's no conversation. And what I'm hearing you say is one of the best ways to enhance your brain health is to engage in real conversation, not just take your stance, dig the line in the sand and say, nope, this is who I am, this is the way it is. Am I hearing you right?
Absolutely. I think flexibility is the key. And that the more we are flexible in terms of being open to other people's perspectives, regardless of, where we may stand, the more likely it is we're going to integrate, learn new material and make us perhaps, have broader perspectives and, improve our general brain health as well as kind of a nice added feature. And, just thinking of social interaction in this context, of course, as you said, politically, we're in a very difficult place right now in the country, if not the world. And, with social interaction, one of the most important things is to sit back and listen.
Yes.
When we think about what's happening in that moment, the person is feeling heard. We all like to feel heard by other people. But there's also something from a brain-related standpoint that's very important when we're listening, because we're learning that information, but we also have to focus very intently on the speaker. We have to gauge their nonverbal communication. If somebody's tone of voice is changing one way or another, we have to understand that. If this person's, really freaking out, really upset, or really happy or joyful or whatever. And, a lot of this stuff happens automatically. But when we're talking, it's harder to get that listening piece in, which is so important for, again, understanding each other, but also very good for brain health from a social interaction standpoint. So from a lot of angles, I guess those are just some thoughts there that we should all be thinking about.
I love, we're going to talk about a lot of stuff today still, but folks, did you hear that? Our brains will get better, stronger. We can create the $6 million man in our brains if we'll just listen to each other, if we'll just engage, have real conversations, not just. All right, I'll get off that soapbox. You reference a dose response effect related to mentally stimulating activities. And you've talked a little bit about this as far as doing a little of this, a little of this, a little of this. Can you talk about maybe a day-to-day strategy? Is it one not new, but is it one unusual, not habit per day? Is it every few hours? Do we know? Is it just once a week? What guidance do you have in terms of the day-to-day approach to this dose effect?
Yeah. So just to define this, so this dose response effect is something that we sort of borrow from our colleagues in medicine. So maybe your doctor prescribes a medication at a level, let's say 5 milligrams to treat maybe high blood pressure. And then your doctor says, we're going to bump that up to 10 milligrams because that additional dose will probably lead to a better response. So by analogy, it's the same idea with lifestyle activities, that if we do a little bit of something, and let's say in this case, mental activity, if we do a little bit of reading, we read the paper in the morning, and that's all the reading we do in the day. That's good. That's absolutely good. But if we do a little bit more in terms of the response in the brain, it tends to be a bit better. And we actually find this across multiple lifestyle factors. So, as you said, sort of in day-to-day life, is there a way to exercise just a little bit more without even necessarily that much more effort, where you get an additional dose and your brain has an additional response to that dose? So say you're walking to your building where you work, and it's a 5-minute walk. What if you walk a little bit farther by parking just a little farther away, and you get a couple extra minutes in that walk? That means that at the end of the day, instead of 5 minutes in the morning and 5 in the evening, let's say you're getting 7 or 8 minutes in the morning and evening. So you're doing just a little bit, and even that 5 to 10% change on a day-to-day basis over the long haul can make a huge difference in terms of just your overall health and certainly how healthy your brain is. So we can apply this dose response idea really to a variety of different lifestyle choices. But that's the idea, is that doing a little bit more can often pay many dividends down the road.
Okay, and a great example with the parking 2 minutes away. It sounds to me you could do that in any. Essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to create routine busters. We don't want to blow up our routine, because that's the key to healthy life, is once you get into a routine of eating certain things, going to bed at a certain time, et cetera. But you're saying the mentally stimulating components kick in when it's outside, not always, generally outside of our routine. So on that extra 2-minute walk, we also try to identify one new billboard, or memorize a license plate, or would that be an example of another way to very simply, without adding time to our day, integrate some dose response to the mental side?
Sure. Being creative and adding a little bit more in is always a good idea. It could be, coming up with a list of things that you're planning to do mentally as you walk in. That 5-minute walk, maybe you don't really have time to do that. If you add a few more minutes in, then you can prioritize. Okay, I need to do X, Y, and Z first in the day. I'll write this down when I get into the office. And that way you're sort of framing your day, with just a couple more minutes, perhaps making your day more smooth and efficient as a result. So, from a number of different angles, that additional time that, in a busy morning, we think, oh, geez, I don't have an extra couple minutes. But sometimes that's all it takes to really make that important shift in the right direction.
Okay, good. If I'm starting to notice some cognitive decline, can that revive and bring me back up to maybe not previous levels, or extend out the time of that decline?
So, if we think about a continuum of our thinking skills, and, hopefully many people, maybe most folks listening to this podcast are in a place where they're doing reasonably well, no significant cognitive problems. Some people will experience what we call mild cognitive impairment when they have some difficulties on some cognitive tests that neuropsychologists like myself might administer, and then more severe difficulties in the category of dementia, such as dementia due to Alzheimer's disease or other causes. And we know that across that entire continuum, when people become more active, especially if they become more physically active, but also some work has shown that if people become more, let's say, mentally active, or eat a more Mediterranean style diet, that they can experience some improvement in brain health. So even in folks in the most severe category where they're experiencing very significant cognitive changes like in Alzheimer's disease, they can actually show some mild improvement, maybe have some more stability in the course of their condition over a longer period of time. So there's no reason to not get active in a variety of ways at any point in life, regardless of sort of how your brain may be functioning at any one point in time. Any sort of activity helps.
Just seems like Alzheimer's has become, outside of the word COVID, the fear factor in our world right now. And maybe it's just because I'm in my mid-50s, and so my friends are all in that phase of, oh, could this be next? Suzanne and I are big fans of the show This Is Us, and that's a central theme in there with the mom beginning to show cognitive decline. And what I'm hearing you say is, yes, these things help leading up. If you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, these things matter. But if you're starting to see it, these might push it out a little bit longer.
Yeah, exactly. And, to be clear, there is no known way to prevent Alzheimer's disease to our knowledge. There's nothing we can do that definitively will prevent Alzheimer's. So that's the bad news. The good news is that the sorts of things that we've talked about are ways to stack the odds in your favor to reduce your risk of developing something like Alzheimer's. And we know that if you, again, exercise at a relatively high level, especially, 20 to 30 minutes a day, not at a really, ultra marathoner kind of level, but just doing a bit more. If you're relatively socially connected, if you try to stay mentally stimulated day to day, if you try to eat along the lines of a non-Western style diet and a Mediterranean style diet, if you manage stress effectively, all of these sorts of things will increase the chances of you aging effectively and in a healthy way from a brain-related standpoint, and more generally as far as your physical health. So for me, my job is helping people understand the things that they have control over. And there are a lot of things that I just mentioned that we do have some level of control over.
Exactly. I love what you're sharing with us, because it doesn't feel like it's out there. It feels like things we can each be doing and encouraging, whether it's clients or friends or family. This is great, Doc. What would surprise our listeners about brain health? What are some of the things that, as you're out there speaking and people are reading your book, they're like, wait, what?
Yeah, there have been a lot of those, I'd say, over the years, looking at the science and doing some of this work myself. I'd say one of the things that really jumps out is this idea of having a strong purpose in life. And it's this really cool idea that if you have a purpose in life, something that guides you in day-to-day life, that could be related to your job, it could be related to your family, could be related to your activities, things that you like to do on the side, your hobbies and sports and so on, that if you're very committed to having a certain purpose, you are much less likely to develop Alzheimer's disease, less likely to develop stroke, less likely to have mild cognitive problems, what we call mild cognitive impairment, less likely to have sleep-related problems like sleep apnea. So there are all of these incredible brain-related benefits to just having that strong drive toward a certain purpose. Or again, it could be multiple purposes. But this is something that I was very surprised to learn about, but it's really compelling how important it seems to be.
Wow. That's awesome. Your work incorporates the role of mood on our cognitive abilities. As I read that, I've thought, what? Can you expound on this concept? Walk us through this process.
So, our mood, just, how we're feeling day to day, if we're feeling good, if we're feeling really happy, if we're feeling low or depressed or anxious, all of that affects how the brain works. If we're in a real positive mood state, we actually tend to be better at learning and remembering new information. We tend to be able to concentrate a little bit better. And if our mood is lower, if we're having problems where either a brief period of stress or depression or what have you, or a more chronic state, that tends to be where we feel maybe a little more scattered. We struggle a bit more learning and remembering things day to day. And we see this both in terms of how people perform on cognitive tests, but also in terms of what people report in day-to-day life. It's interesting when you look at the clinical criteria for depression. One of the criteria include, having problems with decision making, having problems concentrating. So when we're depressed, we just subjectively feel that we have a brain that's not working quite as well as when we're feeling better. I've done some research looking at a group of folks with multiple sclerosis, and we found with a colleague of mine, Dr. Peter Arnett, who's been a real trailblazer in this area, we found that people who are depressed and also have MS perform quite a bit lower than folks with MS who are not depressed. And so this was one other sort of angle off of this idea that, broadly speaking, when we aren't in a great mood, it really can affect how the brain works. Conversely, when people feel less depressed and their mood improves, when you follow them over time, they report having much better mood, or much better thinking skills, rather, that correlates with that improvement in their mood. So there definitely seems to be a very strong relationship between brain health and how we're feeling day to day.
That makes perfect sense. I've never heard that before. What about, and I don't know the exact phrase for it, but something along the lines of cognitive excess baseline. And, if you're a professor, if you're reading every day, if you're pick up the piano at age 72, does that help? Is it like you have this bank where you say, well, I'm used to being up here, and so I've got more to give. Almost like the super fit athlete who, even when they slow down and chill for a year, still is well above the population. Does that exist for the brain health side?
It does, and it brings up, as you said, kind of a bank of information experience that we call cognitive reserve. Yes. And cognitive reserve, guy at Columbia, Dr. Yakov Stern, has done a lot of work in this area. It refers to this idea that, as we go through life, if we are, let's say, pushing ourselves and going into more challenging jobs, getting higher levels of education, just doing things that sort of, stretch our minds, that sets up a certain buffer as we get older that may, in fact, reduce the chances of dementia or may prevent dementia. Again, no known way to prevent dementia, but this is, again, one of those other ways to stack the odds in our favor. Now, this is what I like to describe as passive cognitive reserve, because, down the road, after you've been in college or after you've had a stimulating job and retire and so on, you're not doing those things anymore, but you still sort of reap the benefits of those experiences. But what about people who weren't fortunate enough to get a lot of education under their belts, or to be in a job that was very mentally stimulating? This is where the idea of active cognitive reserve comes in, which is that in any given point in our lives, we can start to ramp up our activities. We can start to take community classes that may be free or inexpensive. We can start to read the paper more, or read books more, or do crossword puzzles, or Sudoku, or woodworking, or a number of other things that are mentally stimulating. And there seems to be increasing evidence that regardless of, how well we sort of were able to set ourselves up from a brain health standpoint early in life, that throughout our lives, we can continue to build that reserve. And I think that's something very optimistic, and also comes back to that idea that we have a certain amount of control over our brain health. So that would be one example of that.
Yeah, you've spliced into several of your answers, Sudoku, crosswords. We heard that for years. That's the solution, or these games, these apps you can do. And the way I'm interpreting your statement is, no, Brad, those aren't the answer, but they're part of a 25-piece puzzle that if you do Sudoku occasionally, you don't want to become the Sudoku master. That doesn't help you at all, because then that's just routine. But if Sudoku plays a role in your week or month as another variety aspect, that is healthy. Is that kind of what you're walking us through here?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I think that mental variety, as in this research paper I was mentioning earlier, the title of the paper was "Mental Variety is the Spice of Life," and it really is. So, if you're doing a deep dive into Sudoku or crossword puzzles, that's great, but you're not being stretched perhaps as much as if you're trying something else to add to that broader mix of things that you're doing. So, it really is about trying to not necessarily always doing a deep dive in one specific area, but to have a breadth of experiences, a breadth of activities. That seems to be a much better idea. And frankly, it makes our lives more interesting. Yeah. If we're trying different things and, sort of checking out different areas, it adds a certain richness to our lives, to our conversations, to our interactions with other people. Does a whole lot of good.
That's a big message, because I think a lot of people are confused, because 5 years ago, they're like, okay, I'll do my crosswords every day. And then the news comes out, well, it doesn't really help. And the way you're couching this makes absolute sense. So I appreciate you clarifying that. So I don't know if this will help or not, but I'm thinking of all your clients, and they're coming in, they're looking for help, and you're giving them this guidance. And I'm thinking of the dentist who says, Brad, you need to floss. And I maybe do, and I maybe don't. How consistent are your clients? You're giving them it's a big difference between me having to get a cavity filled and Alzheimer's developing. Are you finding your clients come in, they hear this stuff, and they're saying, oh my gosh, I am all in. And 6 months later, when you follow up, they are all in? Or is it just like other behaviors in our lives where we're super committed, but 2 weeks later, we go right back to what we were doing? Are you seeing it at a different level because of the magnitude of the penalty if we don't?
Yeah, I definitely think people fall into, a certain spectrum here. Some people are, very interested in change and willing to change, very motivated to do something different. Other people are more, interested in the status quo and find it harder to change, which is the case for all of us. If we develop certain habits in day-to-day life, we all, regardless of, where we are in society, struggle to develop new habits. So what I like to coach people into thinking is just take one step. And I ask folks, what's one thing you can do when you leave my office today that will take you on that path that you'd like to go on based on our conversation? And that's one way to perhaps get some buy-in, is to really make that change as easy as possible. Going from, let's say, exercising not at all, or, really just on that walk to and from our car, during our workday, to, jogging 30 to 45 minutes a day. That's an incredible change. Yeah. But if it means, again, a couple extra minutes on that walk, if it means taking the stairs instead of the elevator, that small change, and helping people sort of find that change themselves, asking them, what is one little thing that you can do? All right. So is that something you think you can commit to me, that today you'll at least try that much and see how that goes? And those small steps often lead to those, monumental journeys. Not always, but that's, I think, the best way to get started.
Well, and the health and wellness coaches listening are just nodding their head and they're smiling. They're saying, that's what I do. Like, this is awesome. I'm actually not just helping people physically. I'm helping their brain health. So that's Absolutely. Great news. All right. We're down to the last question. Any just final words of wisdom? Something I haven't teed up with the right question, or you're like, Brad, ask me this other thing. What else do you want to get out there to our listeners that is critical? Because this is such a key topic.
Yeah, I would really say that what I mentioned before, I really like to hit on again and again, that brain health, to some extent, to a large extent in many cases, is really under our control. That there are things that we can all do starting today, starting tomorrow, not necessarily next week. There's no reason to wait. There are little changes that we can start to make, and those are in the interest of our broader physical health, but definitely for our brain health. So the idea that there's, something down the horizon we're waiting for, it's better to just go with the science. And the science says the sorts of things we discussed, like exercise, being more mentally or socially engaged, managing stress more effectively, eating in a more healthy way. These are the kinds of things that we can all start doing, even if it's just a little bit, and it takes us down that path for better brain health.
Brain health is under our control. Wow. I think that's the title of your next book, my friend.
We'll see. Good thought.
Well, thank you so much. Critical topic, critical time to be talking about it. Really appreciate you joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. Just a lovely conversation. Really appreciate it.
Another thanks to Dr. John Randolph for joining us. We will have a link to his book and other information in the description if you'd like to dig in a little further. Thanks to you for tuning into the #1 podcast for health and wellness coaching and spending a portion of your very, very busy week with us. Next week's guest is one of the leading experts on the subject of protein intake, Dr. Stuart Phillips. We are all seeing protein content highlighted in all sorts of foods and drinks and everything else. But what does it really mean on a practical level for our daily lives? You'll find out next week. As always, feel free to reach out to us with any questions about your current or future coaching career. Results at catalystcoachinginstitute.com, or you can tap into additional health, wellness, and performance resources at catalystcoachinginstitute.com. Now, it's time to be a catalyst. This is Dr. Bradford Cooper of the Catalyst Coaching Institute. I'll speak with you soon on another episode of the Catalyst Health, Wellness, and Performance Coaching Podcast, or maybe over at the YouTube coaching channel.